Well, welcome to this visual tour of 16 commissioned art pieces displayed throughout our Bethany campus. Thanks so much for coming. You may have heard the phrase art for art's sake. And here's the definition. Art is self-sufficient. It doesn't need to justify its existence by conveying a helpful message. Well, by contrast, I'm calling our Bethany art commissioned for our sake. Our art is cognizant of the fact that we are a retirement community and our art exists to assist us through our retirement years. Our Bethany Bluegrass Band presented a program here last year and in which we paired slides of some of these art masterpieces with various gospel songs. Following that event, Joan, please stand up. Joan Ungerleider requested that I take Bethany residents on a tour of our art, which, Joan, as you said, you didn't know that half of this or more existed, and the art that you did see, you didn't know the backstory. So, Joan, this is to fulfill your request. Now, there's no way that we would survive a long walk or standing in front of these treasures where there are no seats. Hence, we are making a visual tour. We had photographs of some of this artwork in our archives, but I leaned on our resident photographer extraordinaire, Lou Han. Lou, will you please stand? And we thank you. So you get the credit for most of these photos. And then I consulted with Bill Sayre, our former president and CEO, who more than anyone else is responsible for our art. And finally, I enlisted Dick Lane back there to put a PowerPoint presentation together for me. Thank you, Dick. My name is Larry, and I'll be your tour director. So let's map out our tour. Here is Far Hills, and there's Bethany Village Drive. We're going to start at the Executive Office Building. I bet a lot of you have never been inside the Executive Office Building. This houses the office of Judy Buddy and her vice presidents and the boardroom where, for our good, important decisions and directions are taken. Here in this building, we find the paintings of William Schickel, a well-known artist steeped in Catholic spirituality, now deceased, whose studio was in Loveland. Bill's artistry started in stained glass, moved to painting, and included sculpture and architectural design. Locally, he designed St. Henry Catholic Church on Springboro Pike, First Lutheran in Xenia, and the Interfaith Chapel at Miami Valley Hospital downtown. Presiding over those board members who are gathered in the boardroom is Schickel's painting of Christ the King. Now, you may not want a king influencing decisions regarding our aging process, especially if you think of a king like Herod the Great in the Bible, who regarded persons as expendable if they did not contribute to his selfish interests. But remember, Christ informed Pilate that he was not like the kings of this world. Rather, it was his mission to serve rather than to be served. And furthermore, he gave priority to those who needed assistance, those people who found themselves oftentimes on the margins of society. It's comforting to know that the decisions of our board of directors are guided by 6 values. I liken our GraceWorks values to buttoning a cardigan sweater. If you get the first one right, they'll all be right. If you get the first one wrong, they'll all be wrong. Faithfulness to Christ is the first value, and with that, the other 5 then values fall into place. On the boardroom opposite Schickel's Christ the King painting is his painting that I call the Everlasting Arms. It's significant that he pictures Christ with whom we who are residents can identify, one who maybe is no longer able to drive, who needs a lift, and maybe even needs a lift from his wheelchair from the strong arms of Christ. Schickel cleverly incorporated the international symbol of accessibility, the wheelchair logo, with this figure of Christ. So we exit the boardroom into a hall, and as we look to one end, we see a metal sculpture by Schickel of Christ as a 12-year-old child in the temple boardroom addressing the educated adults. Looking the other direction, at the end of the hall, we see Christ himself, now an adult, welcoming the children, often in Bible days, who were relegated to the periphery. Here's my takeaway. We as adults and great-grandparents, at times, we have the opportunity to interact with children. Sometimes we who are older need the expertise of those who are younger. Bless Vic Barnett for inviting Kettering High School youth to help us with our phones and our computers. But at other times, we are privileged to offer the wisdom of our years to those who are younger, for whom every disappointment is the end of the world. Whether it's not making the team or not getting into the preferred college. And we're the ones who are able to say, no, it's not the end. We've lived through those times. This too shall pass. A disappointment can prepare you for something better. Well, let's leave the executive board room or board house and make our way on to the Linden House, where we see a tree in the center window of this covered entrance. This is the art of Stephen Canetto, acrylic glass glued onto the window pane. And why a tree? Because just to the southeast of this building, until a few years ago, there stood the largest linden tree in Ohio, so designated by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry. However, it no longer stands, having been diseased to the point it could no longer be propped up. But it lives on through lending its name to the building, Linden House, and through its stately relatives who populate our campus, the towering black walnuts, the gigantic Osage oranges, the mighty oaks, the colorful maples, the copper beeches, and other flora too numerous and beautiful to mention. Well, here he is, Stephen Canetto of Columbus. He's received more Bethany commissions than any other artist. He holds up the Judeo of the Judeo-Christian tradition. He works in stained glass, but mainly his art is expressed in monumental statuary. His latest in our area is out at the Cornerstone Shopping Center, just east of the Cooper's Hawk restaurant. But he has work in the Franklin Conservatory and Mount Carmel Hospital in Columbus, and even in Paris. So we enter the Linden House and take the elevator to the second floor, and here we see 4 bronze statues by Betty Michaelis. A grandma is reading a bedtime story to her grandchildren. The grandson is petting the family dog. A granddaughter is lounging on the carpet, and I wonder what bedtime story they are hearing. These statues were originally formed of clay, but clay, even when fired, is vulnerable. Food carts wheeled by would clip protruding legs, and so the decision was made to have these clay statues cast in bronze, utilizing a company in Colorado and employing the ancient lost wax process. Betty Michaelis lived in several areas in South Dayton. She was living in Beaver Creek when she died at 95. Actually, she worked in the insurance industry until she retired and then took a class in pottery at Sinclair Community College. She quickly progressed from vases to faces, and then to busts, and finally to full-bodied representations of each of her many grandchildren. That led to commissions like the ones she received from Bethany. Her husband built a gallery for her with a huge kiln and a big crane. I had the privilege of conducting her funeral. You can imagine the throat lump I felt when speaking the words, well, I changed earth, to clay, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Well, as we proceed southward down that hall, we encounter another statue by Betty Michaelis. This one is called Let's Fly a Kite. A grandfather is teaching a granddaughter how a kite catches the wind to bear it upward into the sky. When Betty was seeking a model for the little girl, especially for her curly hair, she came to me asking about using my own granddaughter as a model. Well, her mother and father quickly granted permission. And what you see is not Jessica's facial features so much as definitely her curly hair. Graceworks' predecessor, Lutheran Social Services, operated an adoption agency for 42 years. During those years, 2,100 children were placed for adoption, one of which was our now 31-year-old Jessica. Maybe this curly-headed little girl will remind you of a similar act of love. At the end of the hall is the slowly rotating Pillar of Faith. It's the work of sculptor Robert Kepnick. The pillar bears many symbols of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Among them are the 2 tablets bearing the 10 Commandments. The most salient of the 10 for us living here is the 4th, which I quote as I memorized in catechism. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the earth, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. The attention of that commandment has too often been directed to the children, that they should behave and obey, and in that way honor their parents. But actually, the commandment, given that Moses was leading a migrant group of people from Egypt to the Promised Land, the attention was intended to be directed to the other end of the life continuum, to the aged. Ancient migrant cultures often simply abandoned the elderly who could no longer walk as they moved on. I remember complimenting a daughter who faithfully made visits to her mother in the Linden house. And I once said to her, "You're so faithful." She said, "Well, my mother cared for me for the first 2 decades of my life. It's now my honor to care for her in her last decade." Another image bears the symbol of, on the right, of our previous name, Satorch, Lutheran Social Services. Viewing it, I remember a phrase from Revelation, "I will make you a pillar in the temple. I will write on you the name of God and my own new name." Sadly, cast in bronze were not likely to get Graceworks Lutheran Services on the pillar. But a plaque on the wall states that the organizations installing this pillar is dedicated to ministering to the spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of people in all circumstances. And the first circumstances to be named are the elderly, and then the incarcerated, the infirm, the disabled, and the indigent. Faithfulness to Christ means being willing to serve and not to hold out for being served. Well, here's a photograph of Kepnick at work. His art is displayed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, in the Art Institute of Chicago, the National Academy of Design, and the Dayton Art Institute, where he headed the sculpture department for 30 years. When he died, his boxes upon boxes of files were given to the University of Dayton, where he also taught for many years. Now, around the corner from the Pillar of Faith, displayed on 2 walls behind the piano, are 15 biblical prints. Technically, they're called serigraphs. In a whimsical style, 7 scenes from the Old Testament and 8 from the New Testament, These are the work of Cincinnati artist Edie Hepner. Here she is, pictured with her even more famous husband, Charlie Harper. Edie was trained at the Art Academy in Cincinnati. She's best known as a painter, photographer, illustrator, and designer of jewelry. She described herself once as a Jill of all trades, trying to master one. As previously mentioned, her unique prints are rendered in a whimsical style. I'm going to show you two of my favorites, one from the Old Testament and one from the New. So here's the one from the Old Testament. It's a print titled Jonah. It takes a while to see that there is something more there than simply a blue border. After study, one can see a large fish, a whale. It's a big, sturdy, rectangular one. That thin line is the mouth for swallowing. There's his eye for prey. And yes, a break in the blue border suggests the whale's tail fin. And in repose, there in the belly, is Jonah. He's a bit red-faced. He was called by God to go east to the people of Nineveh, but he objected. He didn't want to mess with foreigners. And in addition, he called them enemies. So he headed going west to Tarshish until God's instrument, this whale, captured him and turned him around, and in what my Old Testament professor called the world's longest patooey, he spat him out on the shore of Israel, from where he made his way to Nineveh, and one of the greatest evangelistic efforts in all of history. Well, this is just to say, when we look at this art, it has layers. There is the art object itself to study, as we have just done. And then there's the mirror layer, where one sees something similar to that happened to me in the past. And then there's the window layer, where one gains a view into what may become his own future, if I may digress. My college major was, as you can imagine, pre-seminary. For my science component, I chose geology. I became so enamored with the rock record that I scheduled a meeting with my professor. I'm thinking of abandoning my preparation for the ministry, I told him, and becoming a geologist. In that meeting, my prof took on the role of the whale sent by God. Yes, you can do that, he said, but you're going to end up in some oil field in Arizona. We do need good oil men. But I think the world needs to hear the voice of heaven more than it needs the message from the earth's crust. So I look at this serigraph and that encounter from my past, and I see my own Jonah moment. When you walk by that, take a look at it, and maybe you'll see your own Jonah moment, or one that you might need. And now Edie Harper's serigraph from the New Testament. This print is called Super Supper. It's the Passover, actually, with a twist. It has become the Lord's Supper. At first, it appears that there's not much there. And then you start counting those circles. Those are heads, and there are 13. Right, so it must be the 12 disciples who represent the wholeness of the 12 tribes of Israel. Plus, if you look at the one in the center, you see a halo. That would be Jesus. Slowly, he comes into view. Edie Harper must have taken her cue from Leonardo da Vinci, of whom it is said in his portrayal, okay, all of you guys get on one side of the same side of the table, and get in groups of 3 and strike a pose. What I notice next, though, is before each person is a plate for bread and a cup for wine. And the question arises, in view of the fact that they are empty, is each one still awaiting his blessing of bread and wine, or has each one just finished his bread and wine, equipping him to be a blessing? I've been called to give the Lord's Supper many times, what we call in extremis, and son or daughter may say, we've not been able to make any connection with mom, so don't be disappointed when they spy my communion kit. And then the wine moistened wafer touches the lips. And I say the bread of heaven and the wine of eternity for you, Margaret, and the mouth and the eyes open. And we ask, did we just give a blessing or did we just receive one? Well, all right. Enough of the personal takeaway. We hurry past Alma's shop into Crescent Crossing. Down the elevator, and we stand at the entrance. Soon we'll see Stephen Canetto's stained glass work. But first, in the entrance, on the wall, blown glass artwork titled Blooming Gardens by Jim DeLange. There he is, hard at work in his studio. He lives in Cedarville. His studio is in Yellow Springs. He grew up in Iowa with an interest in photography and stained glass. He gained interest in hot glass in 1999, but was unable to pursue it until he took a class at the Springfield Museum of Art in 2007. And after that first class, he knew that blowing hot glass was going to become his passion. And so now we enter the Wholeness of Life Center and the stained glass work of, again, Stephen Canetto. He calls the room poiesis, and his definition is the process of emergence of something that did not previously exist. He used not only stained glass, but dichroic glass. That's a glass that's been infused with some kind of metal. And as you move about in the room, you see that the colors of these various panels change. I like the combination in the altar room of the Latin cross, that is the longer middle part, reminiscent of God's hand in a past event, and then the equal-armed Greek cross. You think of that of God's hand, a blessing sought over what we're up to here at Bethany, and we call this again art for our sake. So quickly now we move up the ramp to the entrance of our memory support center called Courtyard Park, and here we find a statue called Faithful Caring. Faithful caring is really a mantra. The gentleman on the left has developed needs created by a failing memory. He may once have been a brilliant person, engaged in some important mission in our community, but now he's in need of a companion to lend the elements of faithful caring, which are emblazoned on the wall to the right: competence, compassion, and stability, all lived out under the umbrella of those 6 Graceworks values we encountered in the boardroom. These two may look as though they're dancing. And if you asked him, he might wish that it were so. But this woman, the incarnation of faithful caring, is probably a staff member, but it could also be a relative, a friend offering support. Could be you. Now, right around the corner is a niche with another work by Stephen Canetto, which is called Waters of Creation. In the opening chapters of Genesis, God separated the mists of chaos into the calm waters of the oceans and the dry lands of creation. The backlighted layers of the dichroic glass suggest cascading water. This work is flanked by 2 wedges of limestone, quarried from Indiana limestone with the embedded fossils of early created life. Chairs placed opposite this art offer opportunity to sit and contemplate. You may not only think of the creation, but of your own, for when the mother's water breaks, ushered into this world is a unique creation, you. Seeing the shell, Christians may think of the baptism of Christ by John, his finding a shell in the bed of the Jordan River and using it to pour water upon the head of Christ, or even to contemplate your own baptism. But let's leave this and go to Vista Place. Vista Place, which some of us call the Tower, is one of the earliest buildings on our campus. It is certainly unique in all of Centerville and Washington Township, for it is the tallest building on the highest point in South Dayton. We walked past the library and into the lobby, past the pool table and the fireplaces, to the art room. Just outside on the wall are two pieces that I want to show you, non-commissioned art, meaning contributions by our residents. So here's a photograph by Lou Han called Wild Nepali Coast, Hawaii. On the note to the side, Lou tells us that despite the fact that he's afraid of heights, he leaned out of the open door of a helicopter to take this photograph because he was so drawn to the beauty of the scene. Beauty tends to overcome fear in all of us. And here's an oil-painted painting by the recently deceased Jim Noyes. He called it Reflection Lake, and aren't we glad that we have this picturesque body of water in our midst to walk around? To be passed by a doe and a fawn on their way to sample new campus eateries? To see a mother mallard trying to get her ducklings in a row? To dodge geese, periodic immigrants from Canada searching for a restroom? To spot a red-winged blackbird with a reed for nest building in the bulrushes? And to hear a bullfrog trying for an octave below middle C. And aren't we glad to have the fountain flowing once again? Well, here he is, Jim Noyes, photographed by Lou Han. Many of you have paintings that he made. Our tour proceeds past the fitness center and across Breezy Hill to the covered entrance to the village center. And upon entering the village center lobby, our gaze is drawn upwards to a large sculpture by Stephen Canetto called The Balance of Life. What do we desire more than good balance? Lest we think such works of art that we've been seeing just drop out of heaven, let's make a brief visit to the foundry in Columbus, where the female figure has been cut out of the stainless steel and on to the male figure, which once cut, both of them need to be shaped, and then on to the sphere, which is being welded together using various sizes of metal circles, which, when completed, will be fitted with stained glass imported from Germany. So, as you know, the process, first the concept, then the drawings, then the fabrication, and finally the installation. And the creative process is complete. Here's my takeaway. Whenever I wish I was a generation younger, an image of trying to keep multiple balls in the air comes to mind. Home, family, work, house, church, recreation, vacations, health. And now here at Bethany, at this stage in our lives, Cindy and I have only one ball to balance. And it's not just the two of us who are involved. We have a whole village to help keep just one ball in the air, including all of you managers. From our village resources, we draw perspectives from female, from male, from idealists and realists. When I look at this statue, I think of Tom Proudfoot, afflicted with Parkinson's. He so wanted to dance at a neighbor's wedding. It was upcoming in Indianapolis. And with the training gained from our rock-steady boxing, he gained balance enough, he danced at the wedding. I said to Pastor Scott, your predecessor would not allow us to call the third season of the year fall, for obvious reasons. We had to call it autumn. Balance, we can all help each other with this and not just depend on Alan and Hayden. And what helps us with all of this to be of good cheer? There is nothing like senior humor. Have you heard about the guy who said to his trainer, forget about getting me ready for the balance beam competition at the Senior Olympics. I just want to be able to step into my underwear without pitching over. Well, are you ready for a bit of a hike to Shady Glen Garden Path? It lies between Orchid Circle and Sanibel. Here are a few Lujan photos from last year's event. Phyllis McDermott's watercolor, which became the cover of the program booklet, was only one of 18 paintings. And this, by the bend of the giant Osage orange tree, was one of 18 photographs. All enjoyed the music of the horn quintet called Adina Brass. And here are two of the 153 visitors, Dave and Marty. And here's the announcement of this year's walk through nature, art, and music. Well, we're going to end our tour of Bethany commissioned art in front of the entrance to the homestead. The spiral of life evokes many life images for me. As in a mirror, I was once that baby, dependent, helpless on my own. I was once that teenager seeking a direction for my life. I was once that parent with many responsibilities for family and work and community, and now I'm that last figure, that grandparent, great-grandparent, becoming acquainted with becoming once again, like the baby, dependent. When Stephen Canetto first proposed this grouping of life stages, he positioned the fourth figure facing back like the other two, until Bill Sayre's predecessor, Dennis Bruce, said, no, that figure at that life stage needs to be looking ahead to life's next chapter. And so I see this statuary as a window. I see the home where I was born and raised. I see the homes where I was educated, where I exercised my career, and now I'm here. And I happily regard Bethany as my home. Is this my final one? There's another, someone beckoning, someone ready to welcome. Thank you.